Hello, everybody. Welcome to StraightA. Dawson here, back with NFL Week 13 power rankings. So going into Week 13, we have some power rankings to kind of get down and edit. As you see on screen at the moment, I'm not spoiling the power rankings right away. If you want to see the power rankings just alone, just go ahead and skip to the end of the video. It should all be revealed by then. But I'm going to take it one step at a time. I was going to make a PowerPoint for it, but I couldn't really make it look good at the moment, so I'm still working on that. But I want to kind of take category by category and not just spoil all the fun right away. Again, if you want to see the big power rankings near the end, just want to skip right to the end of the video, understand, go right to the end. But here we are. We're going to go category by category in terms of clusters of teams I believe are very similar to each other and keep on talking them from there. But appreciate again all the support that this channel has been getting recently. And stay tuned for predictions and NFL imperialism. I pushed it back again just because I think Friday would be the best upload. So I'm going to aim for Friday to get that all up and loaded and ready to go. Also because predictions are taking a little bit longer because I'm trying to do the old format I used to do. Beside the point, we're going to get right into power rankings here. The first category being the pretty damn poverty category. Basically, teams I think at this point are the low of the low in the NFL currently this season. And that's the Panthers at 32, Patriots at 31, and Cardinals at 30. I won't talk too much about this because I think it's pretty good and consistent in terms of like those three teams are pretty the bad teams. Obviously, the Panthers haven't picked up any wins. The Panthers overall, I don't think I can name one good thing on their team aside from Adam Thielen. I think Adam Thielen is probably the best weapon or best thing they have going for them. Offensive line's bad, secondary's bad. And that's pretty much it. Bryce Young is still project in progress. So we'll see how he pans out in the future. But right now, worst team in the NFL. Patriots, they have been getting clobbered after clobbered after clobbered. Even having a really bad game against a really bad Giants team. Their O-line and D-line, but they made the Giants look pretty good. So we'll talk about the Giants here a little bit. But Patriots 31 still feels pretty appropriate, dropping down 2 spots, basically to the final 2 bottom. And the Cardinals, unfortunately, I know they're still in the 30 to 32 pretty damn poverty category. It's not the only thing that makes me makes me want to put them up a little bit more is Kyler. Kyler looks good, and I really like where the direction he's going. But seeing the team operate the way they are, they just have a lot to work through. And it's more of an off-season thing. It's not necessarily because they don't have a roster to do it, but right now the team together doesn't have it mentally. And hopefully maybe with Kyler they get some momentum and go up into a little bit more categories, but almost hopefully they get a higher pick so they can get more draft capital to maybe utilize either other talent or pick up some players that they really need for the future. Either way, the Cardinals are a team I was hoping to put a little bit higher, but I can't put them too high right now after the performance they've been going out there and doing. So we'll see going forward, but yeah, the Cardinals at 30. Moving on, we have the category. So these are the teams that just don't do anything for me. They're not necessarily the most poverty franchise. They show some small glimmers of what I like to see in NFL teams. But overall, they just don't move me in any way, and I just don't think they're a very good team at all, pretty much. And that's from 29 to 26. The Chicago Bears, 29. They're only in this category because I see some glimmers of them not being a pretty damn poverty team. Justin Fields might just be the guy. It puts them in a more complicated situation, so we'll see. 28, the Broncos, the Titans. I'm mixed about the Titans. I see so much potential, but they're also an aging roster overall. Their offense really can't get anything together. The offensive line is still horrible. The secondary can get burned so easily. Defensive line is fine, but overall they just lose games they really can't afford to, and I just don't have any feelings for them anymore, pretty much. Beside the point, the Jets, 27. I moved them 4 down, and this is unfortunately because a lot of teams did well and moved up above them. I don't necessarily think they deserve a -4, but honestly, when I kind of looked at it, they kind of deserve an tier or a type of category because at this point, I know Rodgers was just cleared to come back in 21 days or whatever. He's on the basically he's cleared to practice and he can get off injured reserve in 21 days. I don't think he should come back, or I don't think he will come back at all either. But this roster has so much potential, but they haven't unlocked it, and I think it could be just the QB situation. Even when Zach Wilson had good games, though, I didn't see much from the offense aside from a game or two from Breece Hall. But almost every running back kind of gets those kind of games. I know what Breece Hall can do, and he showed it, but I'm not too convinced. And the defense of the Jets, I think, has just lost a lot of steam. I don't think they really care. And I think they had the roster for it, but I think they just lost so much momentum that I don't know how much the team can really get behind the QB situation, Robert Saleh. And I think they just lost it all at this point. And so that's why they're near the top of ants here. And I put them below the Giants because the Giants are actually showing some new reformed signs of life, of like glimmers of what they were last season. Not saying I trust them, but I didn't want to put them out of the ant category, but they didn't really deserve to be much higher than that anyway, so 26 felt appropriate, but at least I see some glimmers in life of the Giants, while the Jets are just a dying breed, it feels like. So, yeah, that's currently the category. Moving on to the mediocre at best category, there is a slight asterisk I'm going to put by the Bucks here at 21, but 25 through 22 essentially is the mediocre at best, with an asterisk by the Buccaneers. We'll get to that here in a minute. The Falcons, I think I punished a little bit too much in my power rankings. I'll be honest with you. I did raise them up a little bit, but I'm looking at the NFC South. I'm looking at the Bucks, the Saints, and the Falcons, and they all feel the same to me. I know most people are more behind the Falcons than the other teams, but I don't know. I don't know if I'm necessarily convinced of that just yet. Maybe it's me just having a lot of reservations on the Falcons. Maybe I did put them a little too low. That's why I gave them a slight boost up, because I was like, well, I was a little too harsh on them last week, and maybe let's kind of realign it just a little bit. But I think 25 is still an appropriate spot for them. The record obviously shows better than technically the Buccaneers and the Commanders, I believe. So you can debate that a little bit. But the Falcons, I don't know. Aside from Bijan having occasional good games and the occasional use of Kyle Pitts appropriately, I don't know how much I really like the Falcons overall. The roster feels very flimsy. It feels like it relies on the bad play of other teams a lot of times, and it's really inconsistent in terms of their offense. And their defense has been under par. It's been one of the better secondaries in the past, but it's struggling this season, and I don't know really how to take that. And maybe it's just a bad season or bad kind of couple games. We'll see. I don't know if I'm necessarily behind the Bucks or Saints more, but it's just how it kind of aligned. I think I see better from the Saints overall, and I think I see some glimmers of what the Bucks can be, even though they are trending down pretty well. Moving on, 24, Commanders. I mean, they're a team that occasionally wins against big teams and loses against a lot of other teams. I really don't know what else to say about the Commanders. They had a big loss this week, though, and it was kind of humiliating, so it's kind of what dropped them down quite a bit. I still kind of put them in the category in the mediocre at best, just because, they kind of are just mediocre. Seems like they put up big passing yards, but otherwise don't really get anything else going. Their defense is now a shell of itself without its main, key pieces there. So the Commanders 24, sure. -4 drop feels aggressive, but honestly, it's not unwarranted. 23, the Raiders. Dude, I don't know what to think about the Raiders either. They actually are kind of sneaky, not bad. That's kind of why it feels a mediocre at best right now. Fits them perfectly, because their defense is fine. Their offense is fine. Aiden O'Connell actually isn't horrible. He finds Jacoby Myers and Devontae Adams pretty well. They're still holding up the line. Offensive line is, sure, it exists. It's fine. It's just that the team is just fine in every category. And they've had occasional good wins. They've kind of died down a little bit this second half of the current season. But I don't know really what else to say about the Raiders other than they feel like a 23 type team, like a not quite bottom 8, but bottom 10 probably. Then we move on to the Saints and Bucks. So we're going to talk about Saints first. And I don't know. They moved down one, of course. But Derek Carr, again, I've been very lackluster based on what I've seen from him. But Alvin Kamara has kind of outshined a little bit when he's had good games. But the last couple of weeks has been a little bit slower. The defensive Saints have been actually not bad. I actually think they have stepped up in a lot of games they needed to. Not perfectly, but they're fine, I guess. I see glimmers of hope and glimmers of wins they do, and that's why I feel like they've not moved. I feel like that's why they stayed around the 20 to 24 range the whole time, because they just either do just good enough for me, move them up one, or stay the same, or they do just barely bad enough to go down one, and they kind of just keep them slimmering down that category. And that's why mediocre at best feels the most appropriate. They were just beat by the Falcons, so you can debate the Falcons are technically better or whatever. I just feel like the Saints are more put together, and that's why they're at 22 for me. Again, you can kind of categorize those, and if pretty much in the same category, I wouldn't argue too much with you changing categories on them. A couple teams I think exceptions are you can move them up a category, move them down a category when we get a little bit more in the middle, probably from 9 to 18 or whatever, but we'll see. Beside the point. And then Bucks have an asterisk because I don't know. I put them in the mediocre at best. That's where I would put them, at top of mediocre at best. But they're a team that I not yet give up on. I don't know why. They showed so much good in the beginning of the season, and now they're dying out so bad. Like, they've had such a big fall from grace, and they obviously have -4. They went down from 14 to 21 over the last few weeks. They played fine, but they are just losing more, and the record's starting to catch up with them. And that's why I'm kind of like, okay, if they definitely lose this next game, I can't get behind them anymore. Like, they're going to go straight down. But especially with maybe their divisional opponents right below them. So the Bucks are kind of in that category for me. It's more of a bias, I think. I don't know why. Maybe for Baker Mayfield, maybe for the team. I don't know. But you can consider that one maybe a more biased answer, just because I feel like I'm dropping them a lot, but I feel like there's still a little bit more for them to give. So we'll see if the season pans out better for them, especially in a weaker division, or if they keep on plummeting further. This next category I'm labeling the outside looking in, and that's the Colts and Broncos. The Broncos and Colts have been on some big winning streaks and big prove-it moments for them, and the Broncos especially have been on a 5-game winning streak, and a lot of people are putting them near the playoff, like top 14 type category. I'm not yet ready to believe that. You can't. I know that there's a lot that can change within 12 weeks that we've seen so far, but the first 5 weeks of this team was bad. Like, it was super bad. Like top bottom 2, bottom 3 worst team in NFL. And yeah, they're winning against key moments, but how many of these are due to luck? How many of these are them just getting the right place at the right time? I think at least 3 of their wins were earned. I think you can argue the Bills game. I think you can maybe argue the oh my gosh, what other game I just had it on top of my head. You can argue the Bills game, and you can argue one other game I was trying to think of. I can't think of it on top of my head though. It's going to kill me. But beside the point, I think the Broncos have earned most of their wins from it, but they are they're showing good stuff, even in the games they maybe barely went out on. The Vikings game is what I was thinking of. Those games, I feel like you can still say they earned it to some extent, but did they deserve to earn the win per se? It's hard to say. They're getting really lucky and getting really key points, and you can maybe argue them a little bit higher. But I'm still, conservative, because there's a lot of good AFC teams and a lot of decently rising NFC teams that you could argue maybe are better than the Broncos. They're rising up for me, but even me saying as a fan, I think we're still kind of outside looking in terms of we're not quite mediocre. We're showing some potential, but otherwise, we're kind of floating around right now. 19th feels pretty appropriate. While the Colts also are a team I've kind of slept on. I'll be honest with you. I don't know if I've really slept on them more than I have not paid attention to them, I guess. And low-key, I've looked through their games and I'm like, man, they're actually got 6-5 record. They're actually the number 7 seed right now or whatever, I believe. So it's just kind of crazy to me. Like, oh my gosh, I need to stop sleeping on the Colts so much. And so I need to rise them up more. But the reason why I'm still okay with them being an outside looking in is because it almost feels like some of the games they've had just kind of been quietly fine. Like, they could maybe eke out a win against a couple of the teams like from 14 and down. Of course, I know you can't see some of those teams, but they can kind of eke out some of those wins and then probably easily beat some of the mediocre best teams. But otherwise, they're kind of just playing silently fine football. The run game's fine from Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss. Of course, Jonathan Taylor's out for 2 weeks, so we'll see how that goes. Gardner Minshew's been suitable. He's been fine. He's been putting up the numbers he needs to. The defense has been solid. Offensive line has been holding up. I mean, the Colts all around are doing fine stuff, but they're still kind of outside looking in, even though they're rising up a little bit. They're getting key wins, and that's important for the Colts. So I can't really sleep on them that much, but they still feel similar to the Broncos, like an outside looking in type team. And we'll see where they kind of advance. Like I said, they're both rising pretty well. They're getting momentum up and getting into that top 16 maybe range. But right now, I'm conserved of them just because there's some worries I have I haven't seen. I don't know if, and I always talk about prove it games, and I think the Broncos are a good example of teams that I think have had prove it games, but it feels weird because they've won them when no one believed in them, and they've won against the Browns, the Vikings, and as a time that they, that no one believed in them, or that some people started to believe in them. So it feels weird kind of saying that I don't know if they've had a prove it game. They obviously have, but I guess similar to the Colts, I still just have a lot of worries about how much of that is legitimate right now. And while we're getting deeper in the season, they're about to have to prove it pretty soon. I think they have easily good potential to move up into like the 15-16 range with a couple good wins this week, especially with I know the Broncos face the Texans. I'm not too sure the Colts face the Titans. So Colts and Titans, I don't know how much that would raise them, but the Broncos have a good point of possibly beating the Texans, which could be a good statement game. So we'll see how that kind of turns out, but that's kind of my feelings about those two teams. Coming up with a name for this category in particular was kind of one of the more challenging ones because, of course, I already used outside looking in because I think that detailed the Broncos-Colts category pretty well. But these teams are technically the teams that are fighting for that 7 spot in their respective conferences right now. Like the teams I feel like are more favored, at least in some retrospect. So I decided to go with the fighters category. And the fighters category, especially when you see one of the teams that's slightly above in the next category, is going to seem like a weird tier. The fighters category, of course, goes from 18 to 14. The Texans are in the fighter category. They're at the bottom of the fighter category, and I'll tell you why. And I think I finally figured out why I feel the way I do about the Texans. The offense is amazing. C.J. Stroud has been astronomically good. Nico Collins and Tank Dell have stepped up to the plate. The offensive line is making sure he doesn't just have to run for his life every game. It's their defense. It's the Houston Texans defense. And I've said it all year that they have a young team. They have a young defense. And they honestly have a lot of missing spots for their defense as well, that sometimes they have an astronomical game and they can snowball into a great defensive game and a great defensive showing. But similar to the game we saw this week, the Texans defense really didn't do a whole lot against Jacksonville. Now, granted, Jacksonville's a great team, but if you're going to put the teams, we got to see some sparks from that. The defense from the Texans sometimes doesn't do amazing. And they showed some glimmers of like doing amazing, obviously in some great games, but early on in the season especially, they weren't amazing. Their 18th spot I feel like is fair, and I feel like they can rise above. And I was going to put them over the Rams, but then I realized the Rams, did amazing, especially with Kyron Williams coming back and Matthew Stafford putting up 4 touchdowns. I couldn't justify it. But that's how I kind of feel about the Texans. And they're, again, this whole category, if you want to put them in the 14 spot, that's fine. Sure. I can see that. I could see you saying, okay, Texans above Browns, Vikings, Chargers, sure. Because I think depending on how you look at it, the Browns and Chargers and Vikings all kind of trending down while the Houston Texans and Rams are trending up. So you can take that with a grain of salt. So I'm finally in the conversation like the Texans are in a very, very good spot. I think the 18th spot is a very respectable spot. I know maybe some people are going to see that as low. They should be a top 10 team or whatever. I don't think they've proved that they're a top 10 team. I would definitely not put them probably 12 or up. You could probably argue 13, but I probably wouldn't put them top 12. 13, maybe. 14, you could probably convince me. 15, 16, easier to go. Beside the point, that's how I feel about the Texans. Get off my Texans rant. The Rams have been kind of impressive to me. I know I've told myself that they have to start proving themselves more, and Kyron Williams coming back and blowing out every team. I know I can't just base it off that. That's why they only got a +1 movement up. Plus, all these teams did decently fine. But like when they have an outstanding showing like that, even against a team like the Cardinals, you have to kind of put eyes on them and say, all right, maybe this team can do something that we're kind of not seeing. Because I think we saw flashes of them doing something. I don't think any people expected them to do the things they're doing right now that they are. And the defense is stepping up. The offense is showing out a little bit in a couple games. And so it's a matter of fact of keeping those two things consistent and making sure they can kind of conjoin and make a good game. Simple and to the point. 16, the Chargers. I just don't want to give up on the Chargers, but because they got such a good roster. They have such a good roster, but they're 4-7. Like, at what point do I just like give up on them? And I'm kind of getting to that point of like, I just don't know if I can consider them a top 16 team, a top half team. They fell enough, and the Rams and Texans rose enough for me to feel comfortable not putting them in the bottom 16. But they're right there, man, and they've been like there for like forever. Just because I've seen them have good games and the roster doing well for 3/4 of the game, and they're letting up the last little bit. But it's starting to wear a little bit, So we'll see how the Chargers do in the future, but they're fighting. That's kind of the whole story here. The Texans are fighting to prove themselves. The Rams are fighting to get back in the Super Bowl race. The Chargers are fighting to stay in the top half. The Vikings and Browns are fighting to keep their momentum. The Vikings, obviously pretty bad loss after pretty good stellar performances they've had, but they're kind of flickering off a little bit. Losing to the Bears is a pretty big loss, especially the way they did. No, it's divisional, but the performance from the Vikings was not good at all. 4 interceptions by Josh Dobbs. Not very good. I mean, I know they're not all, the number maybe seems a little bit bigger than maybe it should be, but it's the facts. And the defense didn't step up almost at all. It was and against the Bears. It's just really hard to, justify it too much where a lot of other teams are doing well while the Vikings are not. And this kind of category from about 16 to about 11 is a lot of risers and fallers because the 3 teams here, the Browns, the Vikings, the Chargers, need to start dropping. And unfortunately, the 3 teams above them in the 11 through 13 spot are just teams that happen to be in the right place at the right time, who won and showed a good performance to get in the spot they are. And I think one of the teams is kind of like the Falcons for me, but inverse. So the Falcons are maybe a little bit lower than I care to. This 13 team is going to be a little bit higher than I wanted to. Either way, the Vikings and Browns have lost some of their momentum. The Browns, without an offense, their defense can't carry, especially with Myles Garrett now getting hurt. We'll see if he comes back. He should be able to play, but we'll see. The Browns defense, even with him, though, didn't wow me. The offensive line from the Broncos isn't the hardest to get through. And the secondary against Russell Wilson, some of the receivers there, isn't the hardest to cover either. So the Browns really just picked up a big loss there that they really didn't need to lose. And the Vikings, again, they lost their momentum too. They keep on going spiral down and down. And that's what they're trying to do. They're fighting to stay in the relevant conversations and really show a lot of vulnerability. So we'll see how it kind of pans out for them in this whole season. This category is a little fun because it's the you could go anywhere category. These are teams I just haven't figured out. They seem like teams that could be really good in their team, but their teams also that feel like they could be really bad. And that's the Packers from 13, the Steelers at 12, and the Seahawks at 11. And I'm going to go ahead and say the Packers at 13 is probably going to be the most hated, controversial thing because of course, I answered a comment not too long ago. They're a bad team. Again, I don't know if I consider them a bad team, but I would definitely say that they show flashes, and unfortunately, I guess the teams are beating, and in prime spots, they're getting above all in the games they lose. They're not the most awful thing in the world. And, of course, winning against the Lions in pretty dominating fashion. Say what you will about the play calling from the Lions, they won. And it's a divisional game. It's a little bit tougher. Thanksgiving, take a lot of factors into account, but the Packers won and have picked themselves up into the playoff category and are looking like a team that could genuinely do it. Their defense is, stepping up to at least a more consistent playing field. And honestly, like a top 10 type playing team. Then you have the Jordan Love, who, again, actually looks like a pretty good quarterback at times. He's not amazing, but he's doing work, and he's getting things done. The run game has suffered a little bit. The offensive line is fine. It exists. But the Packers are kind of a slept-on team. They probably could go in the category of fighters rather than just the I don't know what to do with you tier. I'm kind of leaning there for the Packers anyway, because there's a very small gap for these three teams in terms of going top 10 versus bottom. And we'll see if the Packers actually prove that they could be a top 10 team, but it's going to be careful treading here with the Packers at this point. So we'll see. But the Steelers, I think, have now finally deserved it. This +3 is a reward for them to fire Matt Canada and for finally showing that their offense can actually do something. Their offense looked amazing. Say what you will about Kenny Pickett. He's a safe thrower who's going to get you down the field. May not get a touchdown pass necessarily, but Najee and Jaylen Warren have proven that with the offensive line they currently have, they can run some defenses over. Whether it's Jaylen Warren's type game or Najee Harris type game, one of those two guys is going to run through the defense of their opposing team and get at least within field goal range, and their defense is going to make sure the score stays below 20 for most part. Obviously, games that goes above 20, they're probably losing, but if they stay within that category, their offense is going to do enough to get them a couple field goals, maybe a touchdown, and that's all they need to. And they've consistently have done that, and they've consistently proven that they are probably one of the better AFC teams in that retrospect, and I think they're a very strong contender for that. But I think there's still a lot to prove in terms of they can't compete with some of the top 10 teams right now, which we'll get to the 10 spot too, which is a little not controversial, just that obviously recent events. 11 with the Seahawks. This is probably the reason why I named the category. I don't know what to do with you because I don't know what to do with the Seahawks. I mean, they rose up 2 after losing a pretty bad game, but it's because every team below them fell. And I didn't want to put them below the Steelers Packers because I feel like the Seahawks are still better than them. So they are in the 11th spot. So it feels a little weird to me. But this team on offense has so much potential, and their defense is showing out at times. They are capable of winning these games crucially, but they're starting to lose that momentum a little bit. They're starting to lose the hope in that they can stay within some of these top 10 teams, that they can make the playoffs and actually be a contender for it rather than just being a first-round knockout. We'll see where they kind of end up with more games, but that one is I just don't know what to really do with, to be honest with you. This one's pretty simple. It's called the Bengals. The Bengals category, they're number 10 right now. I don't know how to word this without being unfair or too unfair one way or the other. Because I feel like if any argument I give for them feels like I'm saying, hey, let's hold our horses just because they lost one of the best QBs in the whole NFL. Doesn't mean they're necessarily horrible. Maybe their roster can pick it up. If I say that their roster's horrible, then I feel like I'm overreacting because quarterback's still just one position, and maybe Jake Browning can pick that pieces up because Jake Browning didn't look horrible, but again, especially against a harder Steelers defense and divisional game, you can maybe give a little bit of leeway there. But they already dropped a little bit for me because again I dropped teams incrementally, and of course with the teams around them, I didn't feel like they really could move this week. With the Bills dropping, the Lions dropping a little bit from their losses, and that's spoiler alert for ahead of time. And the Seahawks and Steelers and the Packers and the Browns and the Vikings and Chargers, all their state of things. I didn't feel comfortable moving them just because I feel like they're a better team than 11 through 16. Simple to the point. I feel like if I know the Bengals probably on paper for Vegas odds will probably lose to some of these teams, but at least they had a good stretch of games where they were consistently good, and maybe Jake Browning can bring that back. Again, I don't like judging a quarterback, purely against himself because Jake Browning didn't look horrible either. Give him a game. This is kind of my like freebie week for him of like, I gave you a game, you didn't look horrible. You didn't, the team around you didn't look horrible. Defense, maybe it was, maybe I could have put you down a little bit more for your defense, but your defense played about that category anyway. So we'll see where you kind of end up and go from there. The category below them, the Seahawks to Packers category, isn't necessarily one where I drop them down one and be done with. That's a category where I'm just like, I can skip you or not. Some of these categories, like the Bucks area and the Seahawks to Packers, feel like gaps I can easily jump across and not have to worry about it. Beside the point, I'm keeping the Bengals top 10 because they could pull it back. I think the roster and their coach can be good enough, and I don't want to blame Zach Taylor for everything. I'll blame him for Joe Burrow being hurt, but I'm not going to blame him for being a bad coach because I don't think he is. And I think the roster for the Bengals is strong enough that they might be able to get things rolling. And I'm also banking on some of these teams maybe eventually smartening up and getting a free agent quarterback. We'll see. Keep the Bengals at 10 for now, and we'll go from there. 9 through 7 are the do they deserve to be here category. And what I mean by that is, do they deserve to be top 10? And you could put the Bengals in here too, but I feel like the 9 through 7 are for a different reason. The Bills, the Lions, and Jags, all for almost different reasons, are a top 10 team. Undoubtedly, I feel like they have earned a top 10 spot at this current point in time. But they almost feel like you're a top 10 team because your circumstances dictate it. Almost, you know what I mean? And I'll start with the Bills on this one. The Bills are 6-6. That is, there's not many teams below them that are 7-4, 8-3, whatever. But there's a couple. You got the what's called Browns. You got the Browns, who are a good example. The Steelers, who are a good example, and a couple teams who I think are technically 6-5, who are technically better than them in that category, which I think are the Seahawks and the Vikings are 6-6 or 6-5, something like that. Either way, 6-6, I believe. So they're significantly above some of these teams, but they play to such a high category. And I know I dropped them 2 because, again, the top 8 and top 10 change so much with how well some of these teams do. And they lost to an Eagles, but they also put on a very great performance. Their defense maybe was a little bit more lackluster, but I can't say I hated them either. So it's kind of the question of just asking yourself, like, okay, is this really what the Bills are? Are the Bills really a deserving top 10 team? Are they a team that can make the playoffs? Because they're not even, I think they're technically outside the playoff picture right now. So, by the way they're playing, they deserve to be top 10 in some ways, but a lot of ways they don't either. Almost by name value alone, they're staying in this category. And that's just the big question mark for me, is that I'm keeping them there because I respect the Bills' offense that much, and the Bills' defense can be very suitable. But I don't know if that's almost like a question mark I'm asking myself. The Lions, I think I saw the worst. I think this is kind of the rock bottom for the Lions in terms of like this last game against Packers was probably one of the worst games I've seen be coached, I guess. And again, I get Dan Campbell's a really great coach. I'm not going to just judge him based on one game, but -2. It almost feels like their team is very similar to how I felt about the Dolphins. They feel like they're getting a lot of momentum. They're killing teams when they need to, and then kind of losing based on stupid calls that they're making themselves. And again, I don't think they're necessarily a fraudulent team. I don't think any of the teams pretty much in the top 14, 15 are fraudulent teams necessarily. I think they're just teams that have unfortunate things happen that are going to spiral out of their control if they let it. And the Lions have a good roster, but I think also what keeps them probably in this kind of category is their defense doesn't show up when it needs to. Granted, this last game was on the offense. I'm not going to say it wasn't on the offense. They put up good numbers, but they didn't put up pretty good play calling. So that's why I kind of dropped them down a little bit in saying if they competed against top 6 teams now, do I feel confident they would win? And the answer is no. And it's almost like when we were doing predictions for the Saints and Lions game, and spoiler alert, I picked the Lions. I think most people are going to pick the Lions for this game. But almost after that last game made me question, can the Saints actually beat the Lions? And they probably could. I don't know. It's a question mark I'm asking myself, and not necessarily doubting the Lions can make a playoff run or make a Super Bowl run, I should really say at this point with a record. But it's making me question is like, have they gotten here based on pure luck? I don't know. And that's kind of what we're in the category we're falling right now. Meanwhile, you got the Jags, who are good. They win games. They put up good stats. But they also just have some low points. I don't know. They feel like, again, kind of like a Texans, but like a Texans younger roster type deal, but maybe a little bit more above a tier, I guess. That they feel more consistent. They've matured a year more. It's like comparing a junior to a senior type deal. Like Texans are juniors right now, and the Jaguars are seniors. They're both maturing enough, but obviously being a junior is a little bit more immature, while a senior, and I'm talking about high school, by the way. You can put this in college terms if you want, but either way, it almost feels like the Jags are seniors who are showing what they can do, but still kind of making some mistakes they really don't need to be doing. It makes me question whether they can win against these top 6 teams. And that's just kind of how it goes. I think the top 6 teams are the teams fighting for the Super Bowl. Simple to the point. I think 7 through 10, even 7 through 12, are fighting for maybe that next round, like that divisional round. While I think the top 6 pretty much solidify that they're probably going to make it to the conference unless they're facing each other for some reason. Either way, that's how I kind of feel about 7 through 9 right now. And then finally, here we go. Of course, if you skipped all the way here to see the whole screen, then congratulations. Hi, how you doing? You can just ignore all my other explanations. But we're in the category of 6 through 1, of why are the 6 through 1 in the order they are. And this is a hard one. It's kind of hard for me, especially I think 6 is fine, and I think 1 is fine. But honestly, I think 6 is the one I feel most confident about, but 5, I don't know what to do. 5 through 1, I don't know. You could probably mix these up, and I probably wouldn't disagree. Beside the point, I keep the Dolphins at 6 because, again, they're winning against teams that they need to, and they're picking up wins, impressive wins stat-wise, but they haven't beat a team that really makes me want to put them above some of these other tier teams. I feel like the Dolphins are a legitimate Super Bowl contender. I feel like I can't keep them down too much more. I feel like they're in this conversation. They deserve to be in this conversation. Then you got the Chiefs, who, again, I don't think they're to the caliber they were last year, but their defense is playing better, so maybe they are playing to the category they need to be. But their offense feels like it's taking a step back in some ways, while their defense maybe taking a small step up. I don't know how to feel about the Chiefs, but they're in this category because I know how well their play calling goes. I know how close some of these games have been, and they're playing kind of almost like an Eagles effect, where they're playing down to their opponent sometimes and end up losing some of these games because of that. But the Chiefs are still showing out like a top 5 team, so I'm not going to punish them all too much because they're picking up wins they need to and losing some unfortunate games at times. But they're still doing what they need to, and Patrick Mahomes is still Patrick Mahomes. He's still doing amazing out there, so I can't really fault them too much there. Then you got the Ravens at 4. I mean, how do I put this? They had the game with the Chargers, I believe, 20-10, and they dropped. Obviously, they won. They dropped because they didn't look great. They had to step back in terms of that. This top 5 is something that could easily change to me. This is how small the gap is for these teams for me. Is that I think the Ravens had a less than stellar performance against a bottom quarter of their team. You know what I mean? Like a 16 type team, in the Chargers. While the 49ers and Cowboys had very impressive wins. And that's just kind of how it goes. Like they just picked up the right momentum. And almost you can put the 49ers above the Cowboys. I think in most of the draft I had, the 49ers were above the Cowboys. But I decided on keeping the Cowboys above because the offense from the Cowboys was my biggest worry. And they've shown it for 3 straight weeks that they can do it, or 4 straight weeks, that their offense can put up points without the defense. And the defense is doing the same thing. It's always been doing. So I feel like at that point, the Cowboys deserved a little bit above the 49ers. Even the 49ers probably had the best roster in football today. But they had a 3-game losing streak where they showed some weakness. And if they show that near the end of this season in the playoffs, they're done. While the Cowboys are now showing they're amending that. And the 49ers are amending that too, I guess. So it's a hard back and forth of like, okay, 49ers probably have a better roster, but 3 straight weeks of bad was not good at all. While the Cowboys at least had ups and downs, but they seem like they're ironing out. Like they've consistently fixed the problems. While the 49ers don't feel like they fixed the problems. There's better coached, better matchups, better days. Don't know. So I'm hesitant about the 49ers a little bit still. And then you have 1. And I debated on taking the Eagles off of number 1 because they had a close game with the Bills. The Bills are still a top 10 team. That's why they're still at number 1. And that's why, even though honestly, the Eagles probably shouldn't have won that game. Probably shouldn't have. But they have a 10-1 record compared to everybody else who has 2 losses, at least 2 losses less than them. Or 2 losses more than them, sorry. So the Eagles deserve that spot until they at least get within one more loss at least with some of these teams maybe. And of course I know you can kind of debate like, okay, well you have a 6-6 team above a 7-4 team. Does that really make sense? You have a 4-7 team above, a 6-5 team and the Broncos. What about that? And Like the Chargers are above the Broncos, but the Chargers have 2 more losses than the Broncos. How do I justify that? And it's just purely based on the top 10 teams. I feel like the wins matter more. Like the ratio of their wins matter more when you get to that top. While the middle teams feel like they can get through some struts and low points that they can kind of recover from. And that's the best way I can kind of explain it in my mind here. And this is probably going to be a more transitional week in terms of power rankings because I don't know where a lot of teams will lie. I'm looking at some of these teams. I'm like, I don't know how I feel about the Bucks. I don't know how I feel about the Falcons. I don't know how I feel about Broncos and Colts. I don't know how I feel about the Texans fully, the Rams even. Then you got the Browns. I'm still hesitant on. The Packers feel a little high. The Steelers feel like they're gaining momentum, but their offense still isn't stellar. Then you got the Bengals, who I feel like have a good roster, but are not, obviously lost Joe Burrow. So how are they going to recover from that? The Bills, they look like a better team than 6-6, but they're not showing it in a lot of cases. The Lions, they feel like they're a fraud, or like not fraud, but they feel like they need to be in the top 10, like the way they are. Can the Dolphins actually beat a big good team? Can the Kansas City Chiefs pick up what they've let on? Can the Eagles stay at the top of the NFC and not lose games like against the 49ers or Cowboys? There's so many questions I have, and this feels like this next week is going to answer a lot of those because we have games like the Broncos, Chargers, 49ers, Eagles. I'm trying to remember some other ones off the top of my head because those are the 2 main ones I thought of. But we have some crucial games that maybe will answer some of these questions, and we'll see. But right now, it's how I kind of feel, and we'll see where some of these teams lie by the end of it. And the whole goal of this is that I see the Week 1 NFL Power Rankings. I feel like those are pretty accurate compared to last season, at least in terms of I put it basically in tiered categories of the playoffs, playoff teams versus not playoff teams, and then change it a little bit from there. And now we're going to see, hopefully by the 18th week, by the time we get to the playoffs, it looks pretty much the same as that. That's kind of my goal, is that eventually it all falls into place where the standings are pretty much the same, minus a couple teams. Maybe I feel better about the Jets over the Titans, even though they have the same record, or they have 1 loss more, less, or 1 loss more. So that's kind of how I'm spiraling here and thinking about all of this, and hopefully that's how it's going to turn out. But we'll see. This is the NFL. Anything can happen anytime. So we'll see how it all pans out. Either way, guys, I know this is a little bit different one. I don't know how the editing's going to turn out with the time limit or anything, but hopefully this was a better, different format. I'll try out like a power rankings, like with a PowerPoint eventually or something along those lines. So we'll see in the future. But thank you guys for watching. StraightA Dawson, out.